of a yellow.
May have it. They almost touch.
Oh, they do touch. Little Al wins by just a few tenths of a second.
Indianapolis. To race at Indianapolis is the dream of every driver ever to strap on a helmet and a pair of gloves. To win at Indianapolis fulfills a promise many have made, but very few have not broken.
$175,000 attend the Automotive Festival of the Year. Each Memorial Day, motor fans flock to the running of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway's 500-mile grind. It's catch as catch can at the track as drivers and mechanics ready their souped-up racers for the speed classic of the season. The Daredevils also get set for the killing pace. Maury Rose, 47 and 48 winner, and the other hotshot brick burners await the starter's flag. And with every engine tuned to perfection, they go! George Lynch in car 26 spins. George was really pouring it on, but disaster overtook him. Bill Holland, who finished second last year and year before, finally comes to glory. This is the fastest race in Speedway history, and Bill is making it. His time sets a new track record, 121 plus miles per hour. Linda Darnell's movie kiss leaves everybody somewhat dizzy. And why not? It was a dizzying pace throughout. Woo!
Indianapolis. It's never been a place for the faint of heart. Indy's reputation as a tough place to earn a living became all the greater as, essentially throughout the early years of 500 lore, that's all the information the newsreels found fit to present. Granted, she wasn't as safe then as she is today. But then again, what is? In 1909, a racetrack was built in Indianapolis, Indiana. Originally, the idea was that when the Speedway was not holding competitive events, it would be an ideal location for area automobile manufacturers to test their products. Soon, it was agreed that one race a year would be best. And on May 30th, 1911, the very first Indianapolis 500-mile race was run. The idea of the Speedway as a testing grounds proved itself almost immediately successful, as the first 500 welcomed the advent of the modern-day rearview mirror, a novelty which Ray Haroun utilized in driving the Marmon Wasp home to victory, averaging just over 74 miles per hour. Though Haroun was an American, the early years of the Indy 500 harbored a unique international flavor, as major auto manufacturers from all over the world began to surface at the Memorial Day Classic, with the French-manufactured Peugeot engine soon emerging as the car to beat. In 1913, Frenchman Jules Gou drove a Peugeot to victory while drinking champagne during pit stops. And in 1914, European drivers swept the first 4 positions. But in 1914, the war to end all wars had Europe in a turmoil. The war years were difficult on Indianapolis. During World War I, the Speedway even became an airstrip for 2 years to train pilots for the American war effort. It would take the efforts of 2 men to make the Speedway the world-class facility it is today. In late 1927, the Speedway was sold to World War I hero Eddie Rickenbacker. Rickenbacker piloted the 500 until America again went to war in December of 1941, at which point the Speedway was shut down for the duration. The sounds of engines racing would not be heard for another 5 years. Someone once said, the greatest pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do. Never was this more true than in the case of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway following World War II. The track was in horrible disrepair. Buildings were falling. Weeds were growing between the bricks. And owner Eddie Rickenbacker wanted to sell. Though three-time Indy 500 winner Wilbur Shaw was determined to purchase the track, he couldn't raise the funds. But a Terre Haute, Indiana businessman named Tony Holman came to the rescue and became the proud new owner of a facility that was but a shadow of what it would someday be. After some hurried preparations, the Speedway opened in time to hold the 1946 race. For the second time in its history, the Indy 500 came roaring back from the neglect of the war years. Much more than a facility, Indianapolis is man and machine working against the clock and each other. To an IndyCar driver, winning is everything. In 1912, Ralph De Palma led the race for 196 of the 200 laps before breaking down just 1.5 laps from the finish. Not about to quit, and with the crowd cheering wildly, De Palma and his riding mechanic pushed their car to the finish line as the rest of the field sped past. Ralph De Palma won the approval of the fans and a chance for immortality. He would reach that pedestal with a victory at Indy in 1915. During the early years of the 500, the cars were two-seaters. For safety reasons, every driver was required to have a riding mechanic along who would watch track conditions and traffic. In 1923, the requirement was waived, and Tommy Milton became the first driver to win the race twice. The first man to capture the Indy title 3 times was Louis Meyer. Meyer very nearly won a fourth in 1939 before spinning and crashing. Thrown from the car, Meyer's shoes remained trapped in the machine as he dashed for the infield fence to avoid more serious injury. Meyer retired shortly thereafter. Indy's next 3-time winner, Wilbur Shaw, grew up only 30 miles from the Speedway. It took him 9 tries, but Wilbur finally came home victorious in 1937. He would take the checkered flag 2 of the next 4 races at Indianapolis. He, too, might very well have been Indy's first 4-time winner, but he suffered a collapsed wheel while leading the race in 1941. The accident broke his back and forced him into retirement. The 1960s were a period at Indianapolis when new names began to emerge. Men like Parnelli Jones, Roger Ward, and A.J. Foyt were suddenly household names. Why? Indianapolis. Early on, Roger Ward was known as a bit of an after-hours hellraiser, as well as a rather dangerous driver on the track. He would win the 500-mile race in 1959, and in the span of 6 short seasons, he would capture 2 wins, 2 seconds, a third, and a fourth at Indianapolis. one of the greatest runs ever in American racing history. But an incident in the 1955 Indianapolis 500 would both enhance and put an end to that reputation once and for all. Lap 57. Ward was about to be lapped by race leader and two-time Indy 500 champion Bill Vukovich. Suddenly, his front axle broke, setting off a four-car incident in which, sadly, Vukovich was killed. Ward would later say, "The night after the accident, I became a man." Throughout the 1960s, the name Parnelli Jones was just about synonymous with auto racing in the Indianapolis 500. He drove in 7 500s, winning once. In 1962, Jones planted himself on the pole, becoming the first person ever to qualify at better than 150 miles per hour. In 1967, he showed up driving a controversial and revolutionary machine, powered by a jet engine. The Whooshmobile was a favorite of the fans, but not of the other drivers, who considered it an unfair advantage. Parnelli was leading the race at will when a broken bearing 3 laps from the finish ended his day. Never again would he return to the Speedway as a driver. Yet perhaps the driver the 60s will best be remembered for was a young man who burst upon the spotlight with his first Speedway victory in 1961 and is still driving race cars at Indianapolis some 35 years later. A.J. Foyt. All told, he's racked up 4 wins, a couple of seconds, and a trio of thirds at the Brickyard. Now in his 50s, A.J. has yet to call it quits at the Speedway.
A.J. Foyt takes a checkered flag.
While America had her Speedway superstars of the 60s, certainly the British had more than their fair share of success at Indy. With the advent of the so-called rear-engine car at Indianapolis in 1961, the times, they were a-changin'. The British invasion would have a great deal to do with that. Although the idea of putting the engine behind the driver was not a new one, no one had ever finished a race with a rear-engine setup at Indianapolis, until Jack Brabham showed up driving his tiny Cooper Climax in the spring of 1961. To make matters even worse, the Cooper donned the notoriously superstitious color of green, an old wives' tale, but a Speedway no-no nevertheless. The Cooper managed to cruise home a very respectable 9th in her very first showing at the Brickyard. The smaller rear-engine cars were here to stay, and by 1969, all 33 entries in the starting field would be rear-engine machines. Though American drivers had dominated Indy up through the 1950s, all that was about to change. Enter Britain's Colin Chapman, company owner and builder of Lotus Automobiles, who arrived at the Speedway in 1963 with 3 new rear-engine machines. American Dan Gurney and Scottish Formula One star Jimmy Clark were the drivers. Clark notched a second in 1963 and grabbed both the pole and the early lead the following year, before a fiery accident at the end of lap 2 stopped the race. 2 drivers lost their lives, and Clark would finish out of the money. In '65, Jimmy Clark was back with a vengeance. He became the first driver to break the 160-mile-per-hour barrier, qualifying second fastest. taking the lead at the start, Clark crossed the finish line 2 laps ahead of second-place Parnelli Jones. Jimmy Clark's victory marked the first for a foreign driver since Dario Resta back in 1916. The British had successfully conquered Indy just 3 years after their initial attempt. In 1966, Clark was joined by fellow Scotsman Jackie Stewart and Formula One world champion Graham Hill from England. 1966 would be highlighted by another opening lap accident involving nearly half the field. While Clark and Stewart were well ahead of the action, Hill miraculously made his way through the wreckage to avoid contact as well. Leading the race, Clark spun in turn 4, but regained control and ducked into the pits for a fresh set of tires. Clark was again leading when he spun for a second time. Again, he regained control. A black flag at the 3/4 mark moved Stewart up to first, with Clark and Hill running second and third. The British were suddenly dominating. With just 10 laps to go, Stewart incredibly slowed to a stop at the head of the main straight. To the delight of the crowd, he began pushing his car towards the finish line, hoping to get credit for another lap. Somewhere up above, Ralph De Palma was smiling. With Stewart sidelined, Graham Hill led the final 10 laps to take the checkered flag ahead of Clark. Stewart finished 6th and was awarded Rookie of the Year honors. Although the British domination predominantly ended with this victory, the effects of their influence would forevermore be a part of Speedway history. The 70s saw something special happen at Indianapolis that could only be described as a natural evolution, a phenomenon started by great drivers as early as the 1940s and 50s, when men like Tony Bettenhausen and Bill Vukovich ran the Brickyard for the sheer love of auto racing. With the passing of these greats, a second generation of Indy driver emerged, and in some cases, a third. In the late 60s, Gary Bettenhausen followed in the footsteps of his famous father, Tony, whose life tragically had ended some 7 years earlier in a fiery practice crash on the Speedway's main straightaway. A quarter-decade later, Gary's best finish has been a third-place finish in 1980, a fate due not to lack of will, but more to lady luck. Brother Tony has been at Indy since 1981. His highest finish, a 7th that same year. Vukovich. Perhaps it is the way the word sounds tumbling forth from one's lips, or perhaps it was just because he was a darn good driver. Whatever the reason, the words Bill Vukovich in the 1950s generated instant visions of Indianapolis with all its grandeur. Until his death in the 1955 race, no driver dominated Indy in the 1950s like Bill Vukovich. He won 2 straight 500s in 1953 and 1954, and was leading a third when the 1955 accident claimed his life. Yet what Bill Vukovich started was not forgotten. Young Bill Vukovich Jr. followed in his father's footsteps, driving in a dozen Indy 500s beginning in 1968. With an Indy Best second-place run to his credit, Vukovich Jr. was the first to carry the family ties one generation further when son Bill Vukovich III drove the 1988 Indy 500. Ask someone to name an IndyCar driver, and if they don't mention A.J. Foyt, then surely Mario Andretti is the first name out of their mouth. Indeed, the Italian-born American, though he has only one 500 victory to his credit, just may be the most recognizable race car driver in the world today. Rookie of the Year following a third-place finish in 1965, his claim to Speedway fame came in the 1969 500-mile race. After crashing Andy Granatelli's new four-wheel drive Lotus in practice, Andretti qualified a resurrected backup car in the middle of the front row and easily cruised to victory in record time. Nearly 25 years later, Andretti has come close many times, yet is still searching for victory number 2 at Indianapolis. Son Michael seems destined to succeed where Mario may have fallen short. After garnering Rookie of the Year honors in 1984, Michael Andretti has continued to soar at the Speedway. A second-place finish in 1991 put him oh so close. And in 1992, Michael was dominating the field in his Ford-powered rocket when suddenly the Andretti curse struck again. His engine was finished, and so was his run at Indy on this day. With a Formula One ride just around the corner in 1993, Michael's dream to win at Indy would have to wait. As the only father-son teammates ever to run at the Speedway, Mario and Michael Andretti's legacy was expanded in 1988 when nephew John Andretti made the field for the first time. Then, in 1991, another first. Mario's youngest son, Jeff, also made the starting lineup for race day. It marked the first time ever that one family had put 4 relatives into a single race at Indianapolis. Quite an accomplishment from one of auto racing's greatest racing families. In 1958, Jerry Unser became the first Unser ever to make the starting field at Indianapolis, but was eliminated in a first-lap accident that saw one driver lose his life, and Unser go catapulting up and over the Turn 4 wall. What lay ahead for a family named Unser was to be truly amazing. Brother Bobby Unser began his Indy career some 5 years later. He too suffered a difficult initiation, crashing into the southwest wall in only the second lap of the race. In 1968, Unser's fate would be quite different. Joe Leonard's turbine machine stalled out some 9 laps from the finish, leaving a hard-charging Bobby Unser to claim the victory. His first, but not his last. 2 years later, another Unser brother, Al, claimed his first Speedway victory, racing the Johnny Lightning Special home well ahead of runners-up Mark Donohue and Dan Gurney. In '71, Al did it again, outdistancing Peter Revson and A.J. Foyt for his second win in a row and the third for an Unser in just a 4-year span. In 1975, it was Bobby's turn to win again. In a race shortened by a freak rainstorm, Unser charged to victory in Dan Gurney's Eagle. Al got his third win in 1978 in Jim Hall's Chaparral, and Bobby equaled that feat with his third win in the controversial 1981 race that saw first Bobby, then Mario Andretti, then Bobby again awarded the victory. Unser finished the race ahead of Andretti, but was immediately penalized 1 lap by Chief Steward Tom Binford for incorrectly exiting the pits. As it turned out, Mario had made the same mistake, and Unser, though later fined some $40,000, was declared the winner, and victory number 3 was his to savor. Bobby retired following the 1981 race, but Al certainly did not. In 1987, he won again. this time as an underdog replacing an injured Danny Ungaius. Al's fourth win at Indy put him on a pedestal only two other drivers have attained. And with a third-place finish in 1992, he very nearly had a fifth. That position on the winner's stand in 1992 would be suitably filled by who else? An Unser, of course. As Al's son, Little Al, stood proudly atop the Victory Circle platform, it marked the 8th win by an Unser at Indianapolis, a record few, if any, are likely ever to approach. Never before had one family so dominated the greatest spectacle in racing. While the 60s and 70s led to higher speeds, larger than ever crowds, and even more legends, one new name began to emerge through the 1980s as the man to beat. His name? Rick Mears. Though he didn't set the world on fire his rookie season, over the succeeding 14 years, he would capture 6 pole positions and 7 top 3 finishes at Indy, including a remarkable 4 trips to Victory Circle. His duel with Michael Andretti in 1991 on the way to win number 4 will forever go down as one of the most exciting battles in 500 history.
The field comes off the 4th turn. The green flag waves. Here's the final 13 laps of the race. A drag race to turn number 1. Rick Mears and Michael Andretti.
Well, Rick Mears made a great move down low. He leads the way about now. Andretti's got him going into the short chute. He's a number 2, and Michael Andretti's got the lead.
And Rick looks to the inside, about a 4, 5, 6 car length coming off the second corner. They head up the backstretch towards Larry Henry. A good start for Michael Andretti. A shootout over the final 13 laps. You have him down there, Larry.
Well, Michael Andretti should be heavier. He took fuel on board, but Rick Mears is slower right now, about 7 car lengths behind. Michael Andretti trying to get his first Indianapolis 500 win.
Michael Andretti through 4 running smooth. Rick Mears trying to really miss. Coming down low, they head to the main straightaway, but it is still Michael Andretti, and Rick Mears is ahead toward turn 1, and Jerry Baker.
Former co-rookie of the year, Michael Andretti. Now Mears goes to the outside, and Rick may have him. They move into the short chute. Rick Mears takes the lead.
Just unbelievable racing as Michael passed Rick, and then Rick got him right back in turn number 1. Just unbelievable racing.
Indianapolis. Just the name conjures up visions of tradition and grandeur. The history of the Indianapolis 500-mile race has been a history filled with unexpected surprises. Yet once in a while, something so unusual occurs that it could only happen at Indianapolis. Indianapolis, of course, is a race based on tradition. Never was tradition so challenged as on the 29th of May, 1977. It was then that the command, "Gentlemen, start your engines," first was amended. It had to be.
Company with the first lady ever to qualify at Indianapolis. Gentlemen, start your engines.
On that date in 500 history, Janet Guthrie became the first woman ever to start an Indianapolis 500-mile race. She would suffer a disappointing finish that year, but would be back the next 2 seasons, with a top 10 finish in 1978 being her best. History had been made, a precedent established. Still, it would be 13 more years until another woman racer would qualify at Indy. May 24th, 1992. Lynn St. James started from outside row number 9. The weather on this race morning was among the coldest ever. As if she didn't already have enough to worry about, tires soon became a weather-related concern. Pole sitter and new track record holder Roberto Guerrero spun out on the warm-up lap. His day was through. Somehow, Lynn persevered, managing her way through a day that reaped a multitude of accidents. St. James finished 11th. The next evening, she was pronounced 1992's Rookie of the Year. In a sport where once only men ruled, no longer would a woman's appearance be termed unusual. Aside from the racers and the oddities, the memory that lingers long after a race is over is the race itself.
It seems that I can see the gleaming candlelight still burning bright through the sycamores for me. The new mown hay sends all its fragrance through the fields I used to roam. When I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, how I long for my Indiana home. Good neighbors, good neighbors.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
1967, as A.J. Foyt rounded turn number 4 in anticipation of taking his 3rd checkered flag, an accident in the main straight had cars spinning wildly out of control. Miraculously, Foyt managed to pick his way through the melee unharmed and capture his 3rd Indy title. 1982 saw Rick Mears battle Gordon Johncock wheel-to-wheel for 500 miles. Johncock led Mears, but Mears was catching up. In what was the closest finish ever at the Speedway until 1992, Johncock held off Mears by 1600ths of a second.
The white flag, it's a drag race, they're side by side. Johncock and Mears. Mears on the inside, Johncock, Mears, forced down the little line, Ron.
Johncock cuts him off. Hey, this looks like the start of this race.
Gordon Johncock off the 4th turn, Mears is right behind him. Johncock, Mears makes a try. Johncock wins it by less than 1/10 of a second. Gordon Johncock has won his 2nd 500. Rick Mears comes across in 2nd place.
1985, the spin to win. Young Danny Sullivan, running in 1st place ahead of the hard-charging Mario Andretti, spun wildly in the short chute. Miraculously, Sullivan regained control, stopped for fresh tires under the yellow his spin had created, and rejoined the field. Narrowly avoiding a first-turn accident on the restart, Sullivan caught Andretti 20 laps later, en route to his first Indianapolis 500-mile victory. 1986. Arie Luyendyk's turn 4 spin brought out the yellow only 6 laps from the finish, leaving Kevin Cogan in the lead. On the restart, Bobby Rahal, the KG veteran, roared past Cogan going into turn 1. Rahal's lead held up over Cogan and Rick Mears for the closest 1-2-3 finish in 500 history. 1987. Roberto Guerrero, the young Colombian phenom, was poised to capture his first ever win at Indianapolis. Leading Al Unser Sr. comfortably with 18 laps to go, Guerrero made his final pit stop.
Roberto Guerrero is in. They top him. Now they're about to shut off. There goes the first, second, third switch closed. They've disengaged. He stalls the engine. Now, back the inertial starter. It is in. Roberto Guerrero fires again. It catches quickly. Luckily, they push him off and won't catch fully. Now it does engage. Now it doesn't. A very slow pull away at the south end of the pit. Ramon, it has stopped. Virtually stopped. And Al Unser picks up the lead of the race as Guerrero stops on the pits. Al Unser picks up the race. The crowd comes to a stand. Guerrero sits silently in the pits.
Guerrero's botched pit stop allowed Al Unser Sr. to nail down his record-tying 4th Indianapolis victory, while Guerrero settled for his 4th top 4 finish in his first 4 years at Indy. 1989. Former Formula One world champion Emerson Fittipaldi led 158 of the first 198 laps. But Al Unser Jr. passed Fittipaldi with just 4 laps to go. Then, on lap 199, the 2 leaders, still just yards apart, ran into traffic.
Look at the traffic. That is Rocky Moran in car 33. That is Ludwig Heinrath in 71. And he goes by Rocky. Now there's a lap car between first and second on lap 199. And Emo gets by. And now Emo has a lap and a half.
Here he goes
Emo
past.
on the inside. Here comes Emo. Oh, he blocks him down low.
Emo
And
didn't
they're
like
still
that.
side by side going into turn 3. Emo down low in the middle of the track, and Emo may have it. They almost touch
they did touch.
wheels. And into the wall is Al Jr. Emo continues on. They touch wheels in turn 3. Emo continues on. You can see the damage to the Valvoline number 2, Al Unser Jr.
Emerson Fittipaldi went on to capture his first ever win at the Brickyard. 1990. Dark horse Arie Luyendyk surprised most with a front row qualifying effort. Then on race day, Emerson Fittipaldi again dominated much of the afternoon until blistered tires forced him to slow down under the heat of the day. Bobby Rahal led briefly, but Arie Luyendyk charged past on lap 168 and never looked back. Luyendyk's amazing month of May was highlighted by an average race speed of 185.981 miles per hour, the fastest 500-mile race in history, and more than 111 miles per hour faster than Ray Haroon's winning effort in the very first 500-mile race. But all of this pales by comparison to what transpired on the 24th of May, 1992. For on that date, a day better suited for ice fishing than race car driving, history will record that 2 men survived a mind-boggling menu of accidents and mayhem and made their mark in the 500 history books. Michael Andretti dominated this 500-mile race like few before him had. His Ford-powered Lola led 160 laps, the most by any driver in 5 years at Indianapolis. Then on lap 189, Andretti's engine was silent, and Michael was finished for the day. On a day where drivers battled not only each other, but Mother Nature as well, 2 gladiators emerged. One, a soft-spoken Canadian named Scott Goodyear. The other, a man with a family name synonymous with tradition at the Speedway, Al Unser Jr. With Andretti's sideline, the stage was set for what would be a classic duel between Al Unser Jr. and Scott Goodyear.
2 more laps to go. Will it be Al Unser Jr. or Scott Goodyear in the 500?
Al Unser Jr.'s won almost $1.5 million here, but he's never won the race, and he's got a lot of work to do. Already in the short shoot, that gap gets closer, Gary. Keep those cameras ready. We can have a photo finish once again, about 3 or 4 car lengths as they work down the backstretch. Who's it going to be in turn 3, Larry?
7 Indianapolis 500 victories already in the Unser family. Al Jr. trying to add one more. It's about a 2-car length advantage on Goodyear this time through 3.
They head into turn 4. Little Al holding him off. Scott Goodyear right behind him. Just over a lap to go. They head to the main straightaway. The start-finish line. Who's going to get it?
Dwayne Sweeney waves the white flag. 1 to go. A 3-car length separation between Unser and Goodyear.
And that's how they come through number 1. The gap gets closer and closer and closer in front of Gary Lee. Indeed, about 3 or 4 car lengths as they work off the second corner for the last time. Headed down the backstretch. Headed right at you, Larry Henry.
Scott Goodyear chucked right in behind Al Unser Jr. He's waiting about a car length and a half behind Al Jr. Al Jr. now lengthens it out. He's trying to hold him off. Goodyear low, Jr. high. They go to 4 bomb leading.
Al Unser Jr. has the lead. 1 more turn to go. Here they come. Coming to the finish line. Bob Jenkins, who's going to win it?
The checkered flag is out. Goodyear makes a move. Little Al wins by just a few tenths of a second. Perhaps the closest finish in the history of the Indianapolis 500. Al Unser.
The closest race in the history of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway had also been one of the most demanding. On a day where only 12 of the 33 cars were running at race's end, Al Unser Jr. added yet another chapter to the Unser lore, beating Scott Goodyear to the bricks by just 43 thousandths of a second. The Indianapolis 500-mile race. Nowhere in the world do more people come together for a single sporting event than at the Brickyard. It's a place where tradition was born and is reborn again and again. For over 3/4 of a century now, man and machine have been driven by a challenge, each with a yearning to go faster than the other, each with a desire to put their name in the record books, to be remembered by history as someone who won the Indianapolis 500, a race to glory.